Okay, this is a quick presentation overview of organizational change. Your textbook does a good job of talking about this, but we'd like to kind of broaden the scope a little bit in this short presentation. Basically, the first thing to understand is that there are a lot of forces presently in the competitive environment that are basically leading or creating change. Globalization being one, which is interconnected to markets. The nature and the aggressiveness of market competition, international market competition, local economic conditions. So whether it's gentrification or there seems to be a lot of frictional unemployment, right, where the economy is changing. Our economy has changed dramatically from a production-based to a service-based economy. Obviously, government laws and regulations can do this, especially if you're in the healthcare industry. Technological developments and innovation, certain market trends. For instance, today ordering food online, having it delivered to your house, and then social forces and values, and that can be anything from corporate social responsibility initiatives to values of the leaders like John Mackey at Whole Foods. So external forces for change. There are internal forces for change, and that's generally speaking, it arises when one part of the system creates a need in the organization for another part to change. More often than not, though, it's a response to one or more changes, a response to one or more of the external forces, and that's why we talk about strategy as being largely what we have inside the organization compared to what's needed in terms of value proposition and what the customers are expecting. If you're going to try to create change as a change leader, there are generally speaking three types of strategies that people use. One is forced coercion. You just simply say this is how it's going to be, and you work off of the power bases. If you look at that, right, it's classic conditioning almost. It's off the legitimacy of your role as the leader, CEO, boss, whatever it is, and you offer rewards and punishment. And really, it's kind of the sense is you're forcing people to do it. Either they go along to get along, or they move along. So they can either go along to get along, or they move along. And the nice thing is, some people say, well, that's probably not as healthy of a strategy, and I really will say it depends. It really does depend. If you need to change an organization quickly, you're pretty sure about where it needs to go, and you're in the C-suite, the executive suite, forced coercion, you don't have to be mean when you do it, but it is saying that we need to change quickly. I've worked in organizations where the culture has been great, but really it's a very much a top-down forced coercion change strategy, and they manage behavior by really kind of directing and forcing the behavior and giving rewards and punishment. I worked, and then the rational persuasion model basically uses the ability to create change by providing some type of insight as to why the change is needed, why it's credible, why it's important. So that's more of a shared view of change. The rational persuasion is kind of a shared view of change, but you do have to be an expert. You do have to be able to communicate it in an expert way. And really, we're moving towards shared power. We're slowing down the change cycle and process. We're suggesting that we're basically suggesting that change doesn't need to happen as quickly. And then the last one is where you really slow it down, and that's in shared power. And that's where you might be using a little bit of rational persuasion, but really you're even having people help collect information and become experts, and you're helping people around you with the planning for change. And so you're really involving them at kind of at the very heart, if you will, and soul, and the very impetus for creating change. Ford Motor Company may be the best, one of the best, if not the best, in the last 20 years of showing the importance of leadership. And remember, I say that leadership doesn't have a moderating role. I think structure has a moderating role. I think leadership has a mediating role. So you can still be successful even with moderately good leadership. If you have the wrong structure for the strategy, then you're really in trouble. But if you have a great leader who's able to mediate the strategy correctly, wow, you've got a good chance of success. Alan Mully was such a person. There's a number of videos with him on the internet. I know the Wall Street Journal has a couple interviews with him, and he was basically moved from Boeing to take over the Ford Motor Company in 2006, and basically all of their brands are losing money. And it had been really, Ford had been in a free fall for basically 10 years. So it had a very small market share. And after the change, after Alan Mully took over and brought change, it was ranked in the top 10 of J.D. Power and Associates for quality, named Car of the Year, and had a growing market share, going from basically 16% to. So what happened? Well, new leadership was required to bring change, and that's what Alan Mully did. He was an outsider. He came in with fresh eyes, and he's a great example of a change leader. He used rational persuasion and shared power. And our time here is too short for me to, have you watch a video or have you read a case, but I would encourage you to follow the link below that fourth bullet point and to see what he did and how he did it. Great example of how leadership may not have as much importance as the structure regarding how strategy is done, but to create change and to mediate change, leadership is really invaluable. Just a few other things that are important to know. When we talk about being a change leader, we're talking about somebody who promotes and actively supports any type of creativity and innovation. They have a sense of confidence that their own leadership abilities allow them to pursue opportunities, to take risks. They see something that's unannounced, like a surprise, as an opportunity, in fact. And there's somebody there's very assertive. This is a high-octane leader. The women and men who are like this, they are proactive. They're not reactive. Problems are opportunities. They understand every decision they make creates a new problem, and they ask themselves, are the problems I have now better or worse than the problems I had before? And if the problems I have now are better than the ones I had before, I'm being successful. But they make things happen. Generally speaking, status quo managers take the other approach. Status quo managers are bothered by uncertainty. They're threatened by change. They want predictability. And unfortunately, there's very little of that in the market today because of monopolistically competitive organizations. Most managers don't have the luxury of being status quo managers. So there are really just kind of, if you will, there are two types of change. One is planned change and the other is unplanned. And, unplanned change is a response to something usually in the external environment. And planned change is when you're trying to align with anticipated future challenges. You're sensitive to these, if you do benchmark analysis where you understand your performance gaps, and you're really attempting to create either a major comprehensive redirection for the company, or you're just trying to adjust the systems. You're planning change though. And it's kind of a, here's the thing is that, here's what I find, all right, this is the street wisdom, that where companies experience a lot of unplanned change, they're really not babysitting their strategy very well. They kind of do their strategy and they put it away. But if they're babysitting, updating, editing, auditing their strategy, most of the change that's happened is anticipated in some way, shape, or form. So I really like to think that when organizations do well, when they use their strategy well, they're actually planning change more often than they're having to face unplanned change. So that's the last thing we want to look at here before I let you go, is how a leader moves through a planned change process. And basically to do this, it's 3 steps. The leader has to basically create the need for change, and that's a felt need. But obviously it involves having good relationships with people, helping people realize that the present behaviors of the organization or their personal behaviors aren't effective, and trying to move away from any ways change is resisted. The idea would be is that you want to create a need, an urgency for change. The second is changing, where you actually implement the change. And again, there are different strategies that we discussed that could be used. Could be forced coercion. There's a number of rational. You should have an empowerment strategy. I mean, there's a number of strategies you can use to do this. This part here, we're implementing change. But the point is you're trying to identify and really help people learn the new behaviors. You're having people help identify and acquire new resources, whether that's people or technology, and then you're trying to get the action or the implementation of these into place. And then once you have done that, then you get to 3, which is stabilizing the change and trying to create not only acceptance but continuity behind the behaviors. Standardize the procedures and the values. Trying to support the people who are doing it with necessary resources, and somehow, again, depending on those strategy you use, but here offering some types of rewards or some positive reinforcement. Okay, this is the briefest of overviews on strategic change. I hope this was helpful.